For everybody who's leaving, you're going to miss spicy food. But good morning, everyone. This is going to be primarily a discussion on, or rather us talking about our learnings over the last 8 years. And what I want you guys to take from this, for all the technical folks out here, is a couple of things. One, understand what the landscape is between a startup and a scale-up, and how the journeys are different, and what roles and how roles change across these companies. And for all the leaders out here, I think what would be important to take back would be, whether you're a first-line manager, director, founder wanting to scale a company, is what are the different phases of how you could use some of these learnings which we've kind of run through over the last 8 years and apply it to your teams, your business, or your verticals. So with that, two caveats just before I begin. This is very specific to our circumstances we've had in the company. So whatever you take back, make sure you apply it to your circumstances, your scenario, your business. And second, this is a heavy loaded topic. I have, my timer says it's 14 minutes left, so I'll go quick. And you can catch me at our stall or our booth after this talk if you want to chat up. So just to give you guys some context about the company before we get into details and specifics, we enable businesses to embed communication in their applications. What that means is, we provide APIs, and this is just a portfolio of products. I'll not get into too much detail about the company specifically, but it's a set of APIs where businesses can integrate voice calling, SMS. We have a couple of non-API products as well into their applications for various different workflows. And customers like Zomato, Healthify Me, Practo, Byju's, a few names which uses us in the Indian ecosystem. But like specifically around various different use cases. So let me just take a couple of examples. GoDaddy, for example, when they want to verify you from a two-factor auth perspective on their website, they use our APIs for voice calls and SMSs globally. And another example, let's say, would be Healthify Me. I think they're a recent startup where they have built a call center, which is a support call center, to be able to take calls and to help their customers. Right? So that's just a broad thing. And the reason I thought this was important to cover this before we get into any details or context was just to give you a perspective of what the kind of business we are in. Because I'm just going to run through different kinds of companies and sizes and scales of companies you would see across. And I'll just show you, take this back to like how this fits in the larger picture. A little bit about the journey. We were founded in 2011. I think as per the intro, you would have heard that Mike, my co-founder, and I actually met over GitHub. Both of us were developers. We come from a telecom background. He was more systems developer, and I was more a product developer back in 2011. Plivo wasn't founded as a company as such. We have our roots in open source. It was an open source project before we actually morphed into a company. We realized there is a business model. We spoke to a few early folks, and they said, they'd be paying customers, and which is where the topic goes back to startup to scale up. So it wasn't a planned journey, to be very honest. It was just that it happened and it morphed into where it is. And we've obviously had an exciting ride. 2012 we did our first initial launch of the product. And I don't know how many of you guys follow the Veny ecosystem, but we were part of Y-Combinator, which is an accelerator in the US, in 2012, just before we did our early public launch. Obviously, this doesn't cover all the milestones. There are a lot of things which have happened in between, and this is like a super oversimplified version of our journey. But I thought it was important to highlight key milestones in terms of years and why, and I'll stitch that back into context when we go through these slides to give you guys some perspective. But 2015, we turned profitable as a company and as a milestone. And I make it a point, we talk about this all the time on our all-hands calls, internal meetings, internal discussions, whenever we're talking to external folks, because this is one of the things we pride in as a company. Yes, we've raised some capital, not in tunes of typical capital raises you see, either in India or in the Valley. We call ourselves pseudo bootstrapped. So I mean, you can look at our numbers in terms of what we've raised, but we've run the company with a very different DNA in terms of self-sustainability, solid fundamentals. How do we build the company around customers' requirements, customers' roadmap, and put the customer on the forefront, and then everything is driven around that. And this was a key milestone, obviously, because now it was a self-fulfilling prophecy because it's cash flow positive. We write our own destiny, and then we grow from there. So while that pulls up, I'll just go through our journey between 2015 and 18. So we went through profitability, and if you look back on that journey, the last milestone was 2018. Last milestone was 2018. Oops, sorry. Yeah, and this is important to get back to that because of two reasons. If you go back to 2011, we launched our first product in 2011. In 2018, we actually launched 2 new products, which we looked back in the previous slide. And the interesting part was, and those are the learnings we'll actually run through, the way we did a product launch in 2011 versus how we did 2018 was very different. And those are some of the contexts of we look at various different aspects, right? The people, technology, team, frameworks, processes, all of that, and what's changed. And as technical folks, engineers, leaders, those are some takeaways we could look at on how we go back and think through those. So I thought it was important to highlight that. And yeah, obviously, I mean, this journey has had its own learnings. Not everything's been great. There's been ups and downs, and we've gone through a lot of first-time, newfound objectives in terms of, okay, we could also do this and adapt and grow from there. So I'll cover those as well. And they say whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So here we are, 200 employees, 3 years now, profitable, several thousand customers, multiple office locations. Just last 10 months alone, we've done 3 billion plus, voice calls and SMSs on our infrastructure. Just to give you some context from a perspective of scale, 4 years ago, we would do whatever volumes we did in a month, we do that now in a week. So obviously we're growing at a pretty healthy pace, and this is not free product offering we have. Everything we do is, there is a solid business fundamental behind it. So obviously this scale means a lot, and we reinvest back most of this into the teams and scale that from there. While I talk about startup to scale up, there are a lot of changes we've gone through. We've adapted a lot of processes, structure, a lot of that stuff internally. But some of the things which are common to the company remain core, and across these 8 years, we've not had any change in that. And obviously, a lot of companies call it culture, DNA. That's remained the same. One of the key things, I mean, we're obviously in a large space. So being in a large space, one good thing is you don't have to worry about the market, customers, finding those, all of that. But one of the key things which we drive as a message internally is we're underdog, we're not a market leader. And that's a good thing, because you have to get up every day and go to battle every day to compete with some of the best companies globally. And that's where all the challenge comes in, and it's very exciting because there is no sense of complacency because you're not a number 1 market leader position. And you're not resting on your laurels. You come in every day, go to battle every day, and you have to win those fights. And that's where the best culture and the best aspects of learning are built in. Some companies have a take on remote and distributed teams. We've kind of solidified our take on it. There's obviously no right and wrong. This is what works for us. All of our engineering and product teams are located in Bangalore. In fact, my founder was based in San Francisco. He's moved to Bangalore, and he's the CTO of the company as well. From the beginning, in fact, we actually built a product management team in 2016 and 2017. Before that, pretty much everything was done end-to-end with engineers, and we'll talk a bit more about that. So we have a culture of engineers being able to understand the business, understand the customers, and obviously that helps in them taking a lot of decisions technically and technologically. And like we participate in a lot of tech conferences, communities, all of that since the beginning. So those are some things which have remained same. And I think the reason I'm highlighting that, and that is important, is when you work with companies and start scaling out teams, whether it's an initial startup to a scale up, it's important to remember that while you adapt and evolve, there are some things which form the crux of the company. And it's important to remember that changing that rapidly may not be in the best interest of the company and in the best sense and the interest of how teams evolve. So it was important for me to highlight that. And with that, in the interest of time, I'm just going to run through these quickly now. But this is just a perspective of how companies are structured. On the one side, you have a B2C kind of a company, and we have a lot of them in the Indian ecosystem now, and there, on the other side you have B2B. In India we have very few B2B startups at least starting out. Most of them are either B2C or enterprises who have offices here in the B2B space. And then on the Y-axis you have the stage of the companies, right? Early stage startups to enterprises on the other side. And those are some aspects of like how these companies differ. I'm not going to run through each in the interest of time, but for you to quickly look at how some of these aspects are different, right? Starting from processes to scale, to growth, to release cycles, to customer interaction. Like for example, in B2C, data is everything. You look at data, dashboards, analytics, you don't have customers to talk to versus, in a B2B company, you get benefit of both versus an enterprise, maybe you never even get to look at data because, a lot of these are still old school non-cloud solutions, right? So now coming to, the aspect about a startup to a scale up, what are the objectives in a startup and a scale up? When you're working in a startup, the first objective is to get a working product out. That's the first objective. And everything's optimized towards that. Get the product out, get initial paying customers, get a product market fit. Because a startup's objective is to figure out, do I have a product market fit? Because if a startup does not do that, they will die, right? So that's the first objective for a startup, to figure that out. In a scale up, in a company which is much later stage, objectives are very different. You have paying customers, you have meaningful revenue, you have scale. What you're looking at is making sure you build the customer trust. So quality is of prime importance, because what you say needs to work the way it needs to work, and obviously you can define this in various different ways, right? It could be bugs, documentation quality, what have you. But quality becomes of prime importance. Similarly, reliability, right? Scale, uptime, availability, mean time recovery, all of those aspects come in terms of reliability. When customers expect your service to be a core part of their offering, they would want service to be reliable and make it work. And then obviously there is innovation around various different aspects in terms of optimizing as you scale up. The second important thing is people, or rather the first important thing is people. But this is the reason I say this is because like nothing, you can think about two aspects, right? First, you find the market, the objective. Once you have a clear objective, the reason I said second is because once you have that, everything is around people, and they are the core for like how you build it from a startup to a scale up. In a startup, typically most of the hiring is done on potential. You look at how smart somebody is. That's how we did it. How smart somebody is, and the chops for them to be able to get things done. And then there is a lot of hiring around generalists. Whereas in a scale up, it's not just the potential. Obviously, you have to look at potential. You have to hire A players, but it's also about demonstrated ability. Meaning, are we getting people on board where they've done this in the past and they can help us go through some of these without us reinventing the wheel and figuring out a lot of these things first time, right? So those are some other things which you start thinking, and we had to go through when we were talking about it. And then obviously you start hiring for specialists in specific roles. So that's the people aspect. And then there is obviously technology. On the technology side, initially it's like I said, you getting to market, workable product. It's all about how do we get something out, prototype it very quickly and get it out there. You worried about like how are my next 6 months going to look like? Can I get initial paying customers? And then whatever the team is comfortable with in terms of tech, they pick that up, they do that. There is a reason for that. Obviously, you're optimizing for time to market, nothing else, right? Otherwise, the company is not going to survive. And then like nobody pays attention to automation because you don't know you're going to survive 6 months beyond or not. So obviously the first objective is to get things out in the market, get paying customers, and then you go from there. In a scale up, things look very different because you have a solid business, the company is stable, and then obviously you start looking at things like uptime, scale, right technology. Like in our example, when we started out, a lot of our code base was Python, right? If you look at our code base now, a lot of our code base we've moved all of our Python code base to Golang. And that was important for us in terms of how we've changed a lot of stuff internally, both in terms of concurrency, network I/O, and then obviously we've reduced a lot of instance sizes on where we host on the cloud infrastructure. And then automation, right? Today, like everything starting from CI/CD to like code pushes to infrastructure deployment, scale ups, everything's automated, and we pay heavy emphasis on automation because without that, we cannot have repeatable infrastructure. So that starts becoming very critical, and that obviously leads into uptime, scale, and all of that. I have like half a minute, so I'll just run through these quickly. In a startup, it's about like how do we quickly, whiteboard, spec things out, maybe informally, you don't have like a formal spec, and then somebody devs it. It's mostly, in our case, it was like mostly the engineers developing the product or the feature, and then they queue it themselves and release it outside. Today, we think about a lot many other things, right? I said we released 2 other products in 2018. It wasn't about like, let's just quickly release this and get it out. But we did not want to lose agility. So we said, and now we have a formalized framework where we call it product maturity framework, where we have an alpha. So you could still release products like a startup, and that's called an alpha and a private beta. So that has limited exposure to our customer base without affecting the reliability and scale and uptime credibility, and that we communicate to customers. So when we tell them something is alpha and something is private beta, we tell them that this is what it is, this is what you expect off of it, but then you don't lose agility. So we're doing the entire same cycle, right? Minimum viable product, market fit, we figure out from customers, are they willing to pay for it, and then we invest more time and resources. So it's like, initially it's like a couple of folks coming in, building something, we get it out of alpha, private beta, and then we start formalizing it if there is interest into public beta and GA. And at that point, you even have an opportunity to roll back and say, look, there's not much customer interest in the initial alpha and private beta stage, and we maybe don't even want to release a public beta and GA, right? So those are some things in terms of a product framework, and we call it product maturity framework, which we've adopted from our initial days to just fit the stage as a startup goes into a scale-up mode. And the last one is team structure. My time's up, but I'll just quickly complete this in 30 seconds. Startup, essentially, like I said, we had all generalists. Everybody was an engineer. They were doing, product spec. They were doing code. They were doing design, testing, QA, and even customer support initially. It was a monolithic team. They were handling 3 products. And when I say common funding, like the entire budget into engineering was allocated to like that whole team initially. And then obviously, there was a common 20 engineers owning all products. That's how we started out in the first 3-4 years. And today, the teams look very different. So what we figured out is what worked for us at that point. Today, we are a team of 200 employees, and majority of our team size is, or team composition is tech teams, tech folks, right? So we figured out we don't want to lose all that agility. So we've split that into what we call a GM model. Essentially, it's like micro startup teams. So each product is a self-contained team, right? How it was like a 20-people team 7 years ago, and they have their own unit and they're responsible for everything end to end. And nothing happens outside that team. Obviously, there are pros and cons to this, like there is a lot of code which is rewritten. They don't have to depend on other teams. We've tried every single possible model, and this works the best for us. And obviously, you saw the results. We've been able to release this out. And the advantage of this is, for us, every product is revenue generating. Right? So what that means is, now this is a mini startup or a micro startup in itself, because they have their own revenue, they have their own budgets, and everybody has visibility to it. They're driving the same metrics. So it's like a 20% startup and into n number of products we keep doing in our life cycle, right? So that's, I think, an interesting one. And I saved this slide for last so that I could put, people, technology, and the framework into one along with the structure and talk about how that has helped us in terms of separating ownership, but also maintaining that same startup culture we've had 8 years ago. Yeah, I was a bit over time, but that's all I have. Thanks all of you.